This was a morning unlike any other. This was Veterans Day morning. A man walked by, older, slower, unnoticed. They saw the faded brown hat, the quiet steps, the skin worn with age, and thought they understood. But they did not understand. Not the missions buried in silence. Not the lives saved that no one ever heard of. Not the letters written to ghosts that he never stopped honoring. This was more than a gate routine. It was a breathtaking moment in history. Not because he demanded attention, but because dignity needed no words. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if you still believe that honor never expires, like and subscribe, because this deserves to be remembered. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the front gate of Fort Grantham, casting the checkpoint booth in pale golden light. A breeze tugged gently at the flag overhead. But inside the booth, the air felt colder, sharpened by the kind of laughter that was not kind. Elijah Monroe stepped forward. 82 years old, his back straight as a rifle, his hands steady even with age. His brown fedora, faded at the brim, cast a shadow over deep-set eyes that had seen more war than most men on this base would read about. He wore clean khakis, polished loafers, and a well-pressed button-down shirt tucked neatly under a brown wool jacket. He carried no weapons, only a cane in one hand and a thin envelope in the other, creased, sealed, and important. "Good morning," he said calmly, handing over an ID card that had been folded into the lining of his wallet for decades. His voice was soft but clear. "I am here for the memorial." The young lieutenant at the gate, Mason Rusk, 28, high and tight haircut, cocky stance, took the card with 2 fingers as if it were something unpleasant. He glanced at it, then laughed. "This thing expired in 1990, Rusk scoffed, flashing it toward the other guards like a punchline. "Sir, if you are still a sir, you cannot just walk onto a base with something that looks like it came out of a cereal box." Elijah did not flinch. He simply waited, eyes calm, as if he had heard worse. And probably had. Rusk continued, tapping the ID against the metal booth with a smirk. "Come on, this place gets enough walk-ons trying to play war hero." Booth, Sergeant Kylie Baines leaned out, sipping coffee. "Let me guess, another decorated veteran with a good story and a badge from the Reagan years." The guards chuckled. Elijah did not speak. He extended his hand to take the card back, slow but steady. His fingers brushed the edge of the envelope tucked under his arm. Still no protest. Rusk handed it back with a shrug. "Sorry, old-timer. No valid ID, no entry. Try the museum down the road." Elijah nodded once. Then, ID in hand, he turned quietly, walking back toward the parking lot. No anger, no words, just dignity, leaving behind only silence where laughter had been. Private Elio Torres leaned against the interior wall of the booth, arms folded across his chest. He had not said a word during the whole exchange. He did not laugh, did not grin, just watched, eyes narrowed beneath his cap as the old man slowly retreated. "That was painful," he muttered. Lieutenant Mason Rusk was still grinning, clearly proud of himself. "Come on, Torres. You do not seriously think that guy was legit? Did you see that ID? Looked like it survived Desert Storm in the dishwasher." Kylie Baines snorted into her coffee. He had that whole wise elder vibe. Probably tells kids he taught hand-to-hand combat to Chuck Norris. More laughter. A few other guards outside the booth caught wind of the jokes and wandered closer. One of them, Corporal Lenny Shaw, added, "Honestly, I thought he was here to fix the plumbing, who shows up in khakis and a thrift store jacket trying to get on base." Someone else chimed in, "Maybe he is writing a book. How I faked my way into a military memorial." And just like that, it snowballed. The group fed on itself, laughter louder with each exaggerated jab. Someone mimicked the slow gait Elijah had walked with, leaning on an imaginary cane and pretending to be confused. Even Rusk chuckled at that one, shaking his head in amusement. But Torres did not laugh. He watched the man as he reached the edge of the lot, sat down on a bench beneath a quiet tree, and removed his hat, placing it respectfully in his lap. He did not look back once. Something about him, felt wrong. Or maybe it felt too right, too composed, too quiet to be fake. Torres had grown up with stories. His abuelo had fought in Korea, never talked about it unless pressed, and even then his voice would change when he did. Lower, slower, filled with ghosts. Elijah Monroe reminded him of that same quiet weight, The way some men carry things without ever asking others to notice. And they had laughed at him. Does not sit right, Torres murmured again, more to himself now. You say something? Rusk asked, tossing the worn ID into a plastic bag labeled invalid credentials. Torres did not answer. Instead, he stepped outside and watched the old man under the tree. The sun lit the edge of Elijah's cane. There, etched faintly into the polished wood, was the Marine Corps emblem. Not decorative, not store-bought, real. Torres reached for his phone. His cousin Jordan worked in civilian logistics out of Arlington. Maybe he could run a quiet search. Inside the booth, the laughter was still rolling. Outside, beneath the rising sun, Elijah Monroe sat in silence, unmoved, unbothered. But something was shifting, and Torres could feel it in his gut. This was not over. Not by a long shot. Deborah Lane was stirring a pot of grits in the mess hall when the news floated in. Quiet at first, carried by 2 guards, grabbing early coffee. You should have seen the guy. Walked up like he owned the place. Rusk nearly choked on his own laugh. She did not react at first, just kept stirring. ID was older than my mom. Swear to God. Dude had a cane and this weird envelope, like some secret agent stuff. Deborah's spoon slowed. Rusk told him to go try a museum. The guy just turned around and left. Did not say a word. Now she turned. What did he look like? She asked without lifting her voice. One of the guards glanced at her. Old, black, maybe 80-some, brown hat. Wore it like it meant something. Deborah's chest tightened. Brown hat. Yes, one of those soft felt ones, not like a baseball cap. She set the spoon down carefully, wiped her hands on her apron. Was he quiet? The guards looked at each other, then back at her. Did not say much, did not fight back. Just left. Why? Deborah exhaled slowly, her voice growing distant. I think I saw him once before, a long time ago, back when this place still smelled like gunpowder and broken promises. They blinked. It was 1982, she continued. Explosion at the fuel depot. Everyone ran except one man, skinny, older even then. Walked straight into the smoke. Carried 3 men out like they weighed nothing. He never said a word, just left. You think that was him? I never caught his name, she murmured, but I never forgot that face or that hat. The room grew quiet. Meanwhile, back at the checkpoint, Elio Torres sat in the break room, phone pressed to his ear. Jordan, it is me. Yes, I need a favor. Can you run a name through personnel archives? Quietly. He gave the name slowly. Elijah Monroe. There was a pause. Probably served during Vietnam, maybe earlier. Marine Corps. Might have been high rank. Anything you can find. Torres hung up and glanced out the window. Elijah had not left. Still on the bench, still quiet, like the world could fall apart around him, and he would simply wait for it to pass. He whispered his father's words to himself. Real warriors do not demand respect, they carry it. At that moment, a young communications officer overheard a sliver of Deborah's story and, out of curiosity, snapped a discreet photo of Elijah through the glass. He posted it to the base's internal forum. Does anyone recognize this vet? Turned away at the gate. Deborah says he saved lives in '82. The caption was not loud, but the image, an old man sitting tall under a tree, hat in lap, eyes fixed forward, spoke volumes. And within minutes, the silence began to crack. The security office at Fort Grantham was rarely quiet. Between radio chatter, foot traffic, and guards rotating shifts, silence was a rare visitor. But when the phone rang that morning, sharp, deliberate, and unmistakably direct, the room hushed before anyone even picked it up. Private Elio Torres was closest. He recognized the caller ID immediately. Pentagon secure line. He stood upright and answered, voice steady. Private Torres speaking. The response was crisp, male, and commanding. This is Colonel Renee Langston. I need to speak with the officer in charge of the main checkpoint. Immediately put me on speaker. Torres did not question it. He raised a hand to silence the room and called out Lieutenant Rusk. Call from D.C. They want you on speaker. Rusk, who had just returned from his heroic veteran takedown retelling in the locker room, sauntered in. He rolled his eyes as he stepped up to the desk. This is Lieutenant Mason Rusk, he said, smirking slightly. How can I put me on speaker? The tone cut through the air like a blade. Rusk fumbled for the button. Now on speaker, the voice filled the room with an icy calm. Lieutenant Rusk, this is Colonel Renee Langston with the Special Operations Legacy Office. As of this moment, you are to treat the man you turned away, Sergeant Major Elijah Monroe, with full honors. You are speaking of a man whose service predates your birth, whose record includes operations so classified they are still redacted across 4 branches. Rusk went pale. Sir, ma'am, I was not aware. No, you were not, Langston snapped. You saw an old man with an outdated ID and made a joke of it. That old man led Operation Falcon Wing in 1972. He commanded the rescue of 27 prisoners in North Vietnam without a single casualty. His clearance under Directive 117B remains valid indefinitely. Silence fell like a dropped flag. Sergeant Baines stammered. Wait, that Elijah Monroe? Yes, Langston confirmed. And you humiliated him at your gate. At that moment, headlights appeared outside the booth. A black military SUV pulled up with 3 high-ranking officers in dress uniform. The lead figure stepped out, his presence sharp and immediate. Colonel Isaac Greer. Where is Sergeant Major Monroe? He asked, his voice thunder without volume. Rusk, mouth dry, pointed toward the bench by the tree. Colonel Greer nodded once. Stand down and prepare for honors protocol. Without waiting, he marched straight toward the tree. Inside the booth, no one moved. Rusk's hands trembled slightly. Torres glanced around, then said quietly, What did I tell you? Outside, Elijah Monroe rose slowly. Greer saluted with precision. Elijah returned it with the calm certainty of a man who had done so thousands of times. But this time, it meant something more. This time they finally saw him. It started with whispers. By the time Colonel Isaac Greer led Elijah Monroe back toward the main gate, those whispers had become orders. Urgent calls spread across Fort Grantham like wildfire through barracks, offices, and the mess hall. Prepare the corridor. Full honors. Incoming Sergeant Major Elijah Monroe. Within 15 minutes, the base transformed. Uniforms were hastily pressed, medals fastened, helmets adjusted. An honor guard formed along the main road, stretching from the gate to the memorial courtyard. And at the center of it all, Elijah walked slowly, unaided. His cane tucked beneath one arm, his brown hat shielding his eyes. The envelope remained in his hand, untouched, still sealed. Colonel Greer walked beside him, 2 other officers trailing behind. None spoke. They did not need to. The sound of boots snapping to attention was language enough. As they reached the gate, Lieutenant Mason Rusk stood at full attention, jaw clenched, eyes forward. Sergeant Baines was beside him, face pale and unreadable. Neither dared speak. Elijah passed them without a glance. But Colonel Greer paused. For your information, he said, turning toward the security team. That ID card you mocked contains a passive transmitter. It activates once a year on Veterans Day. That is how we know he is still alive. Rusk blinked, stunned. We track him. Greer's voice sharpened. Number, we honor him quietly because Sergeant Major Monroe never wanted attention. Only to ensure we remembered those who did not come home. He turned, and the group moved forward. Torres watched from the booth, heart pounding as the procession made its way down the lined path of saluting soldiers. Sunlight glinted off dress uniforms. The quiet was deafening. By the time Elijah reached the memorial courtyard, the crowd had doubled. Officers, recruits, kitchen staff, mechanics. Everyone stood still, hands at their sides, or raised in salute. No one asked questions now. Colonel Greer gestured toward the memorial wall, polished and solemn. Elijah stepped forward alone. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the envelope, and placed it gently at the base of the wall. Then he knelt, not out of pain, but out of reverence. A hush fell across the courtyard as he bowed his head, one hand resting on the carved names of 18 soldiers, names no one else had spoken aloud in decades. Names only Elijah remembered year after year. He did not speak. He did not cry, but the silence around him felt sacred. And when he finally rose, turning back toward the crowd, a single voice called out from the ranks. Sergeant Major on deck. In perfect unison, hundreds of boots snapped together. Hundreds of hands saluted. Not out of rank, not out of duty, but out of something deeper. Respect long overdue. The memorial courtyard held its breath. Elijah Monroe stood facing the wall. Stone polished smooth, names carved deep into its surface. Names few remembered, names he could never forget. Colonel Greer took a respectful step back, letting the old warrior stand alone. Elijah's hand hovered over the names. His fingers traced them slowly, reverently, like reading Braille from memory. Each one belonged to a man who had followed him through fire, mud, and darkness. Some had called him Sergeant, others had simply called him Monroe. All of them had called him leader. "I did not come here for applause," Elijah finally said, his voice quiet but strong, cutting through the hush like morning light. "I came to deliver these." He placed the envelope gently at the base of the wall. "I have written letters every year," he continued, not turning around. "One for each of them. I told their families what kind of men they were, what they did, what they gave." The crowd behind him stood motionless. "I never mailed them," he added softly. "Did not think anyone would care." Colonel Greer stepped forward. "They did, Sergeant Major." Elijah looked up, startled. Greer nodded. "We have been retrieving your letters every Veterans Day. The names and addresses on those envelopes. They were not just symbols. We delivered every one." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Elijah blinked slowly. For the first time all day, his composure wavered. "You delivered them?" "Yes, sir. Every year. Some families have kept every letter. Some read them at dinner. Some frame them." A hush deeper than silence settled over the courtyard. Elijah closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they glistened, not from weakness, but from a heart finally understood. Lieutenant Rusk stood at the back, stiff in his uniform. His gaze locked on Elijah. When the old man turned, their eyes met. "I am sorry," Rusk said quietly. Elijah held his gaze, then nodded once. "You saw a man, but you did not see the weight he carried." Rusk swallowed hard. "I see it now." The crowd slowly parted to allow Elijah through. He did not need an escort. He walked tall, and as he passed the line of recruits and officers, a realization echoed louder than words. The wall bore names of the fallen, but behind one name still stood a man. Later that afternoon, Fort Grantham's base commander assembled an impromptu gathering in the main hall. Over 200 personnel, many barely out of basic, filled the room, their chatter subdued, their expressions solemn. Colonel Isaac Greer took the podium briefly. "Today," he said, "you do not just get to meet history, you stand in its presence." Then he stepped aside. Elijah Monroe walked up slowly, his brown hat in hand, the room falling into respectful silence. He surveyed the young faces before him, some curious, some ashamed, all listening. "I am no hero," he began, "just a man who kept his promises." He paused, eyes scanning the back where Lieutenant Rusk stood rigid. "You have been taught that honor comes with rank, ribbons, or recognition," Elijah said, voice firm. "But real honor, it shows up when no one is watching. It is in the way you treat a stranger, even one who looks like they do not belong." He stepped back, and the applause that followed was not thunderous. It was reverent. Afterward, Rusk approached him slowly. "Sergeant Major, I failed you." Elijah turned. "No, you failed yourself. But now you have a choice. Change how you lead, or keep pretending the mirror does not matter." Rusk stood taller. "I will change, sir." Elijah nodded, accepting neither apology nor praise, only truth. That evening, a bronze plaque was installed at the base's main gate. The Elijah Monroe Gate, for the quiet valor we almost did not see. And beneath it, in smaller text, "Honor endures even when credentials expire." Fort Grantham had turned a page, not because of who Elijah was, but because they finally understood what he stood for. The following year, as morning fog curled over the quiet town of Briar Ridge, a black military SUV pulled into a modest gravel driveway. No one knocked. They did not have to. Elijah Monroe stood at the front door already, brown hat in hand, as if he had been waiting, just like he always did on Veterans Day. A young officer stepped out and saluted. "Sergeant Major," he said, "permission to accompany you." Elijah gave a faint smile. Permission granted. And so the tradition continued. Every year, a vehicle arrived. Every year, Elijah returned to Fort Grantham. Grantham, not for parades or speeches, but to kneel at that wall, to whisper the names, to leave another envelope. He never asked for celebration. But the base gave it anyway, an honor corridor formed with every visit, not out of duty, but thankfulness. When he passed away quietly in his sleep at age 89, there was no news, just a sealed envelope on his desk labeled, "For the ones I could not save." Inside, one final letter. Honor does not disappear. It only needs one person to remember. Justice may arrive late, but it is never absent. Do not stop doing right, even when no one is watching. At Fort Grantham, the Elijah Monroe Gate still stands. And every new recruit is told the story not of a man who asked for respect, but of one who carried it even when forgotten. Because some warriors leave medals behind, others leave legends written in silence. And some, like Elijah, leave a message that echoes far beyond the stone. You do not need a title to stand with dignity. You just need the bravery to never let it go.